Assessment and screening is what we're going to look at next. And this is a very important area because unless we know what an athlete can do physically, it's very, very difficult to provide a program that is individual for them, that is aligned with sporting demands, and also that it allows us to track, the impact of a training program that we provide. So this is what we're looking at. Philosophy initially of why we're assessed in the first place, what we're looking to achieve from it, and that will lay the foundation so we can look at hockey-specific assessments from a range of things, looking at capacity, strength and power, and conditioning. So let's get stuck in. The learning outcomes initially from this section are threefold. Firstly, to understand what those assessments are that determine physical capabilities of a hockey player. To evaluate your current approach. Again, in the task, there'll be an opportunity to sort of reflect on what tests am I currently using? Are they aligned with sporting demands? Can I improve them? Are there things which I'm doing well? And so on. And then finally, to create a list of 3 to 5 assessments that you will be using moving forwards. This is going to depend on context largely because some assessments are easier done than others. Some require more technical equipment, that kind of thing. But the majority that I'll be mentioning require essentially little to no equipment at all, which is obviously very helpful. To recap again, if we look at the philosophy of training, we're trying to take someone from this left-hand side of the bridge in terms of what someone can do over the bridge to the demand that they're going to be faced with during match and competition demands. And the training program needs to be informed by the assessment and aligned with the sporting demands. And capability of an athlete is obviously determined by the assessments that we pick. And the word assessment, screening, testing, diagnostics are all going to be used interchangeably, and they all mean broadly the same thing, which is anything which seeks to determine the capability of an athlete's physical abilities overall. So 3 key principles we're going to look at initially here. Number 1, it informs the impact of a program. You must be assessing in order to understand if you provide a training program to someone, is it making a difference to their physical capabilities or not? Because if we don't, we're sort of just stabbing in the dark and it's kind of unclear whether we're actually making any real noticeable impact. Again, if those assessments aren't aligned with the sporting demands, you might be improving on something that just might not be the right thing. And so in the ideal world, you've got assessments that are aligned with sporting demands and that inform the capability of an athlete and also inform the impact of the overall program across a sort of 6 to 8 week, maybe up to 12 week sort of time frame normally. And so we can change the program and adapt it every kind of 6 to 8 weeks, ideally, in reflection of those changing outcomes. And so we might be working in sort of 4-week blocks typically, or month-long blocks. But at least every quarter there should be some sort of assessment so we can change things if we need to, if it's making no real meaningful change in performance. Secondly, it determines capability in relation to demand. So as we've said, we need to understand what an athlete can do and where they need to be. That's important. And then finally, an important question that I really kind of came to understand through my time in the IS is, what is the physical limitation to performance? That's ultimately what assessment is providing us with. That's the information it's providing us with. So if we assess a range of physical capabilities and a range of physical qualities, something will stand out from that, which is telling you that there is a physical limitation somewhere. And that might be in the running profile, it might be in their movement screening, it might be in their capacity scores, but something is limiting them in some way. And some things are going to be strengths and some things are going to be weaknesses. And our job with assessment there is to determine which one is which. So if we look at informing the impact of the program, first of all, again, there's a saying, if we're not assessing, we're guessing. And what this means is that effectively, without assessing what someone can do, we're really kind of stabbing in the dark. We're not really sure what a program is doing. It's not really clear what the impact is. It's not really clear if it's aligned to sporting demands. And so we must make sure that we're assessing. Secondly, it allows a program to be modified. So if the program, for example, isn't having the desired effect that we want, then we can change it to ensure that it starts to have the impact that we want. Let's say, for example, you're doing a running-based session or running-based program overall, and after a 12-week block of work, you realise that very little impact's been made on some sort of marker of maybe maximal aerobic speed or repeat sprint ability. That's giving you some information that actually the program hasn't had an impact. So you have to change it if you are to improve things again. And maybe you need to go into more depth in the assessments. And then finally, it helps with decision making because the information that assessments provide gives clarity of outcome. So it becomes very obvious what it is that an athlete needs at this stage. Without understanding that information, it's quite hard to make effective decisions. Imagine you have an athlete who you're writing a program for, and you have no objective information. It becomes really hard to determine what the athlete needs to be doing. Whereas if you've got really clear information from assessments, it becomes much, much easier. It determines the capability in relation to the demands of the sport. So again, it provides a baseline measure. So if you're starting out with an athlete, or you are an athlete yourself, you've got a baseline to work from, so that when you come to reassess, you can compare against that information. That's important for many, many reasons. One's motivational. One is about objectifying the result. If you're a coach, it provides clear information to the head coach, so you can say, as a squad, we have progressed X amount. This player is here, and this player is here. So really important to understand that. Provides clarity of outcome for individual players and for head coaches and that kind of thing, because you can very clearly inform people of what's the limitation to performance, why the program looks like it does, how it's individualized, and that kind of thing. And then lastly, identifies injury risks. So if you've gone through a movement screen and you've also gone through a tissue capacity assessment, for example, in terms of the kind of core injury prevention markers, and let's say single leg hamstring bridge assessment is scoring really poorly. This is something we'll cover in the strength training section. And you set a gold standard of trying to hit 30 repetitions and an athlete can only hit 18. Then there's a red flag there of injury potential. Maybe one side of the other or the other is much, much lower. Maybe there's a 15 to 20% asymmetry, and that's a little bit of a flag there that one side needs to be brought up to match. Otherwise, there's potentially a risk of some sort of soft tissue injury at that site. So that, again, it identifies risks and provides clarity of outcomes. You could say, this player has got this score, and the impact of program decision making is that there's going to be a high focus on high volume, localized tissue work on those hamstrings to ensure that we bring them up to speed. And finally, ask this question. This is actually a picture taken from Bisham Abbey when I was working with the EIS and GB hockey. And so one assessment here is the use of a force plate. Again, that could be used for many, many reasons and many, many outcomes. So we're not going to dig into that just now because it's probably too much depth for this initial section. But it identifies the easiest wins that can be made. So if we've done a series of assessments, let's say we've done the force plate testing and something like relative peak power is down, then it highlights to us that there's something we can work on there. It narrows the focus. It shows us exactly what it is we need to work on. And if we've got enough information, it also hopefully enables us to see where those things are linked. So if some scores are really good, but some scores are really bad, we can focus in on those ones that are not performing quite as well and sort of funnel right down to what we need to work on. And then finally, it cuts out noise and provides signal. There's so many things that make up performance. Performance is a little bit messy at times. There's so many different things that contribute to it. It's not predictable by design because sport is chaotic. And so sometimes it can be very unclear what the clear outcome is we're trying to achieve. So the more information we have that is aligned with sporting demands and informs the capability of the player, the more we can cut out noise that might be muddling our decision making to provide clear signal of what an athlete needs and the outcomes we're trying to achieve overall. And then finally, just the benefit of assessment, really what the key things are and why you'd want to use it. Clear communication around outcomes is an important one. If you're working with athletes and you want to be able to give them information about, what the outcomes are, how they've performed, the progress they've made, what the decision-making process is going to look like for their program moving forwards, that's really helpful. It's also helpful for informing other coaches and other practitioners if you're a S&C coach, because once we've done this process, we can inform other coaches of these outcomes, which makes messaging much more clear. So everyone is aligned on what the outcomes we're trying to achieve are, how we're going to achieve it, and that makes buy-in from players much, much better. It objectifies decision-making, so rather than making decisions based on either, feel, intuition, that kind of thing, obviously that does have a place sometimes, but having objective markers removes emotion from things, and it makes the decision-making quite calculated and clear, and your language can be, rather than I think, it can become the data suggests that. And so it kind of removes you one step away from the program and makes sure that things are always objective, which is massively important. And then it ultimately enhances performance impact, because the more specific the assessment, the more information that you have that's really crystal clear, the more likely you are to make an impact on those numbers. And those are the things which ultimately can lead to a performance impacting program. So the task for this section is just going to be to create a list of 3 to 5 that you're going to use, and I'll link. There'll be a link in the section to download the task sheet. And the main reason for this is that taking from this the kind of key outcomes, you want to have a list of 3 to 5 that you're going to be using to use in the field that's going to be easy to implement. It's going to provide lots of useful information about the impact of the program overall. And in the next section, after this next couple of videos around assessment, we're going to be looking at speed training for hockey and how you can train for this optimally. Massively important area, so another exciting one coming up as well. So I hope that initial kind of overview has been useful, and next we're going to be digging into some specific assessments that have a performance impact for hockey players.